All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Roome from Periapsis Press, and tonight I have with me Paul Thompson, author of the Nutcracker Trilogy, which I do have with me today, and I have
Yay.
the others up there. I just moved them from back there where they would have been more prominent, but hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me.
Oh, happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
I've got a whole bunch of links in the description for Paul Thompson's stuff. Um, I've I've reviewed all three of these books, and we also did a written interview
Mhm.
after the first one, just before the release of the second.
Correct. Yes.
So this is going to be a little bit of rehash for us, but just want to have another way and give you more opportunity to talk about some of the points that we covered there and wander off into other topics.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited. And that's usually what happens when you talk to book nerds is we rarely stay on one topic. We're always, flitting about at some point. Yeah, so finished the third book. I guess that came out last September. So about what is that, 6 months ago now? Something like that. And I've just been really excited to see Drosselmeyer, or Drossie, as I like to call him, live on. And I'm still getting messages from people. Some of them I know. A lot of times it's people I don't. They'll reach out and say, "This was probably my biggest." Like, yay, I've won. Is it's extremely popular with boys. Boys
Nice.
love to read the book, and I'm getting the messages from mom saying, "Yeah, he doesn't read, but he got this one, and he went with it." So, you know, I count that as a personal victory.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Can you talk a little bit about like where the character came from?
Sure. So back in 2019, before the world was entirely insane, I got asked to play the role of Drosselmeyer in the Nutcracker Ballet. Something you should know, I grew up in a very conservative Baptist home. We did not dance. And so, yeah, if you've ever seen the musical Footloose, like that was my childhood. We did not dance. And so later on in my adulthood, when I got involved in musical theater, I could act and I could sing, but dancing was just not something I did. So when the ballet company reached out and they said, "Hey, we need someone to play Drosselmeyer," I had actually never seen the ballet. I have a degree in music. I had listened to the score many a times, but I have this little personal it's not a mantra, I don't know what you call it, like a personal rule that I will never say no to an opportunity unless I just simply do not have the time. Um, and I had the time to do it, and I said, "Sure, I would love to play the part of Drosselmeyer." So I ordered a full score online, and I went through to see where he enters, and I showed up to my first rehearsal, and they said, "All right, so 5, 6, 7, 8, you're gonna throw the cape around your face and you run in and then you scare the children and you do this magic show." And I said, "Well, why do I scare the children? I have my pencil in hand because I'm an actor. Of course, I need to know my motivation." And they said, "We don't know, just come in when the bassoons go doodly doodly dee, and then you come on 5, 6, 7, 8." And like, well, I mean, I could come on and scare the children, but I really need to know why I scare the children. They had no clue. And I talked to the head of the ballet company. I talked to people who were in ballet world, and everyone was like, "Well, because you're Uncle Drosselmeyer, you come on and you do this magic show." So I started doing my own research into the character, and sure enough, nobody knows, kind of a thing. I had to go all the way back to the original storyline 200 years before. Well, no, let me think. Yeah, about 300 years before the ballet was written, this book by Hoffman about Uncle Drosselmeyer, who shows up at his niece Clara and Fritz's house, and he gives them magical toys, but the parents think the toys are too nice, and so they lock them up in a cabinet. And then the children are really mad, and Uncle Drosselmeyer, who wears a glass wig and can change himself into an owl, he's really mad. And the rest of the book is sort of these just lovely nonsensical tales. There's not really a theme that goes through. So anyway, as I'm studying Drosselmeyer, I realize, okay, nobody know, like, I have no clue why does the ballet happen? And the story behind the ballet is, you start off with Drosselmeyer. He comes to a party. We don't know why the party's happening, but the party is there, and he throws this fantastic magic show, and he brings out dolls that dance. And then in our particular version of the ballet, he has this globe, and he enchants it, and he enchants the Nutcracker doll. And Clara, who of course falls under the enchantment of the Nutcracker doll, falls asleep on the couch, and then she wakes up and she goes into this magical world. So the end of act 1, you go into this, like, all of the dances. I think it ends with Dance of the Snowflake, with the snowflakes. And then act 2 comes in. I'm sorry, it ends with the death of the Rat King. And then act 2 opens up, and it's just all of these dances from all over the world. um anyway, I got the idea for a short story. I was like, well, this would be fun. I could write it, and then I could give it to everyone in the ballet company, like, Merry Christmas, here's. And my very first idea was a tableau. It was a scene of like 5 people in various animal costumes getting ready to raid a castle. And I was like, oh, it'd be so cool if they were like these teenage superhero something, and I started writing it with next to no research on it. But I was writing it during the 15 days to flatten the curve. We just actually celebrated the 3-year anniversary of the 15 days. And something in me said there's a bigger story here. And the more I delved into it, the more I realized there's got to be a better reason for the Nutcracker ballet to happen. And so then that kind of took me on a trip. I had never written a book before, not seriously. I knew nothing about story writing, about story structure. So I took a couple months, and I read every book I could on dialogue, storytelling, how to write a story, even how to market a story. Um, and then sat down, and I just kept thinking about the story, and then wrote it. And what do you know? It turned into a trilogy.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah, big time, big
Just
time.
swept you up in it.
Yeah, there was just something, I think all of us were dealing with things. And I had lots of emotions, and I felt like there was a good story to be told. I think I had 9 rewrites on the first book. And my first stage in writing is always a verbal vomit, like, I'm just going to throw it out on paper. And on this one, I just vomited way too much. I remember the first note I got back from my editor, and I sent her, I think, the 6th rewrite. Before I finally got an editor, I sent her the 6th. And she said, well, first of all, there's way too many adverbs. You need to pull back on that. And then it was just, the story was very cluttered. There was stuff that didn't make sense, and I was being too preachy with it. And I hate movies and books that are too preachy. And here I had fallen into the same trap. So between original, the closest I got to that original tableau in the first book, there's a scene where he's approaching Alexander Palace. It's this palace that's in the middle of the woods, and there's some nefarious things going on there that he exacts his revenge. Um, and that was the palace that I had originally dreamt of. And so the story had changed to where it's sort of this little side quest, if you will. But that was the original scene I had in my head for why it would make a good book and a good story.
And it takes a long time to get to, like, the actual Nutcracker bit, too.
Yeah, you don't actually get to the Nutcracker until book 3. And that was, again, on the original the original book, I start off with a prologue that kind of was so in the ballet version, and I've since danced the Nutcracker, I'll use that term loosely, danced the Nutcracker a couple times. But the original production that I was in, as the orchestra is playing the overture, there was a scene where I walked out on stage and there was a kid, his name is Toby. I use his name in the book as a character. Toby was his real name. He is Drosselmeyer's apprentice, and he's the one who comes out and he shows me a box, and I open it and I hold up this doll and then put it in the box, and we exit, and then the curtains open and you're at the party. Um, and that's how I started the original out. And I think I use it as a I don't for up until the very final, like before I hit print, I had that as the ending scene of the first book. And then when I realized, no, there was more of a story to tell, I ended up cutting it. So yes, the actual ballet doesn't come in until book 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tremendously fun. I enjoyed writing the ballet in that sort of chapter. And then as it weaves into more of like act 2 of the ballet, plays into the storyline.
I felt like it was it was extremely satisfying.
Mm.
It was like I'd been extended this promise, right? Like, we're going to get to the Nutcracker.
Yes,
And then,
yes.
like, to have especially, like, the party. It was like,
Yes.
"This is it."
This is it. This
Like
is it. Finally. Right. And that was one of the things having made some friends in the ballet world, I told the bunheads, hey, if you read this book, there are going to be little pieces here and there that, you might be the only ones to get. But when you get to the actual ballet, I think the fun part is just in the same way that Wicked got to recontextualize Wizard of Oz, it was fun recontextualizing the whole thing, even the party. And just, in my own opinion, there was sort of like an optimistic hopefulness, and it's a pretty rough period in my book that the people are living through, and then to have this little glimmer of light with the party, that combined with, finally we have the party and now there's a reason for it, at least, in my happenings.
Yeah. I, um I felt like that scene was a pivotal moment, and it happens before there's even a plan, even, really. Like, there's like, Fritz has an idea of how he's going to get his friends out, of the orb for, like, the first time, really. Like, he's
Right.
got a concrete idea of what he can do, and it's within his reach. But, like, the greater antagonist that comes after that, like, it's all up in the air still.
Right, everything's up in the air, and I love it because, Fritz, his sort of character, and it really is just one book. It's one giant story that I split into 3 parts, and Fritz he's always wrestling between, I think his natural tendency is to just be lackadaisical, um, but then he loves his family. Like, that is the one thing that he loves. And so when he gets to the party, to realize that the stakes are extremely high and he is gambling the most precious thing in the world to him, um, but he's torn because the woman he loves is trapped inside of this. He had promised himself, I'm going to set you free no matter what it is. All of a sudden, there's this hope, like, I can do it. I've been extended what I've told I need to do this, but literally it rests on a knife edge. One wrong move, and not only are his friends trapped forever, but he could lose everything that he loves, everything that he's worked for. I will have to say, writing at first, one of the traps that I would say I didn't fall into because I chose to fall into it is, um, everybody wants to save the world from disaster, and every single superhero movie you watch, the world is in danger. And it gets to a point, okay, the world is in danger. New York is going to get blown up. And somehow it goes. Some of the greatest lit out there, I think, is you realize, like, the human condition, you have to make them love something, and it can be something very small, and as long as that is in danger, you will capture their imagination with it. I don't know if you ever read Ramona Quimby growing up.
Yes, but it's been a long time.
Okay, so one of the things I love about Ramona, other than just she's precocious and always mischievous in her own sort of way, there is one story where she does something bad and she is cut off from using the family tube of toothpaste. And this is just life has ended. And I remember as a kid reading this, we didn't have, like, I guess I was a rich kid. I had my own tube of toothpaste and it was flavored, and looking back, it's amazing to me that I cared so much about Ramona getting that family tube of toothpaste. Like, that stood for something. And I it's very tough when you're writing a book, especially in this genre. Like, the world doesn't have to end, but I mean, I'm a sucker for the world ending. So yes, by the end of Drosselmeyer, it was like, I've got to ramp up the world ending. I've got to ramp this up. You got to keep going. And it took quite a while to formulate the final boss, if you will, and why that was important. But I had him figured out before I finished book 1, so that I could leave everything I needed to in book 1 and book 2 leading up to it. And it was not like he was there at the beginning. I just had to get to him by the end.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
All three are, you talk about it being sort of one story in 3 parts, but all 3 books are pretty distinct as far as, like, main antagonist,
Mm-hmm.
and like the sort of subgenre vibe. Like, the first one's very much reminiscent of Magic School.
Yes.
The second one is more like political intrigue in like a totalitarian. And then, like, the third one, you've got gladiator battles and
Right.
and it's all very unique and exciting, and you don't feel like, oh, I wish this part had just kept going, but do you have a favorite, I guess? Like, what?
No, and I think if I'd kept it all in the same world, one, that would have just been so much work, because then you have to develop that world. As it is, I got to develop a little bit of St. Michael's, and then I got to develop a little bit of Anadorn, and some of the capital city, and then finally in the last one, it was a bit more grand. And so I was discussing realms and the Watcher's realms and what happens, how those are created, why they are, and how they play that difference. But it really was just, I enjoy those genres. One of my favorite movies as a teenager was Gladiator, and there was just something so satisfying about that movie. I've always enjoyed Sword and Sandals. I don't enjoy violence as a typical rule. I have 2 black belts, and so I've gotten to fight plenty. But my favorite, if I'm watching a movie that's going to have fighting in it, like, I want them to do that jump up, slow mo, camera circle around. Like, it's got to be the campy, cheesy sort of stuff. That's what I enjoy. Sword and Sandals, if there's a dragon that pops out of the ground, I'm going to be happy. If it's a bit too realistic, no thanks, I don't want it. But yeah, each of these worlds, I kind of got to write to something I enjoyed. I did not read Harry Potter until post college. I
Okay.
went, so when I read it, um, that idea, it was not actually the school that interested me, it was more the friendship between the three of them that captured my attention. And so when I first started writing this one, I wanted Drosselmeyer to be, or I wanted Fritz to be at a certain age, which meant he would kind of have to go to school. And I needed him to meet people. School just seemed like a really great place for it. And by the end of it, when I was rewriting it, I had to say, this is not Hogwarts. Like,
Sure.
it needs to end. Like, this is not Hogwarts. I'm not creating another one. J.K. Rowling did a great job with it, and no. So St. Michael's was there for a reason, and then once it was done, it was done.
Um, so you've talked a little bit about like now I'm not sure. I just re-listened to the Anarchist Bible Studies interview with you
Oh yeah.
because like I was like I don't want to hit on everything that they. So now I'm trying to remember if we talked about it or if I just listened
Oh,
to.
it's fine. Ask questions. Yeah.
um, like building out a magic system.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have a quite like things are nailed down like
Yeah.
how it works.
Yes.
And like there's a lot of developing that in the first book. And I know you based some of it on like the choreography of
Yes.
the actual Drosselmeyer. But then like in the second two books, you like cut him off and like won't let him use magic.
Right. Right.
So like what was your reasoning there and like
So one thing I hate most in magic books is magic as an ex machina. Well, so I don't know if you ever saw the movie Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds years ago. It nearly ended his career, and for I mean, not for good reason on him. I thought he acted quite well in it, but the script of it was terrible, and the whole purpose of it, the whole idea of this ring that is like, it's just your imagination, like that's your limit, is your imagination. And like it got to this silly fight where at the end he creates like a big cartoon fist and he hits
I
the guy,
remember
and
that,
I was
yeah.
like, the ring can do whatever you want it to do. Like, it could solve all of your problems with a thought. So either the main hero is too stupid to own this ring, like he should not own this ring, or there's got to be limitations. I love limitations, and in magic, um, magic, it can very easily turn into an ex machina. It's just there; it becomes the thing you need. He said a spell, and blah 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 blah. Well, I didn't want spells to be that early, or that easy. It couldn't just be he waved his hand and that appeared, because then whenever he gets into a fight, you're going to have readers go, so make a dragon appear and eat the guy mid-flight. Like, that would have been me as a kid. Oh, this is what I would have done if I had all the power in the world.
Right.
So when I first started writing the book, I came up with several rules about magic. It had to cost them physically, so magic could not be something that they just do all of the time. um, there had to be rules, and the rules had to be difficult so that someone learning it, it would make sense that they would be an apprentice. They would have to have someone there that guided that. Um, and and then honestly, by the time I finished the first book, the lessons that Drosselmeyer needed to learn and everything that he had to go through, he couldn't have I didn't want him to have that security blanket of magic there. He had to grow as a human. And one of the things that I worked into I think in the first book, and hopefully it came out clear enough, is that wizards are just people like everybody else. There's human nature there. And that is one thing from the real world that I did put in this world, is human nature is fairly similar. They have all of this power in the world, it corrupts them. They become lazy, and the mantra a small girl with a knife could defeat a wizard if he's sloppy. It's your knowledge. You have to keep up with it. And in a very human way, you know, you could have a very powerful person or someone who's very good at something, and they could get lazy and get sloppy. And then, it just takes one small thing and you're done for. Like anything else, you have to keep current on it.
Yeah, I love that mantra. I feel like it works on several levels for the story. Or it's like this reminder to the characters, like, you need to be prepared and you need to, you know, uphold your you need to be diligent in your own shit.
You are not, yes, yes, you are not immortal.
Yeah.
You are, you have weaknesses.
But
And I,
then it's also almost like a prophecy for
mhm.
like the antagonists. And then it's also like that even the smallest person can change the course of history type deal where it's like a promise too. It's like it works on a number of levels and I
Very
appreciate
much
it.
so. When I read Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy, I think that that series probably has one of the best twists in literature ever written, as far as magic and that goes. I've read several of his other books since then. They did not capture me like that one did, but one of the things I was really impressed with was the limitations he set in his magic world. And that's probably where I got most of my um ideas, or not even just ideas, but the concept that magic doesn't have to be limitless. Uh magic can be an art, it can be a craft, it can be a skill, and it needs to cost the person. That was my takeaway, is it's got to cost the person using it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of um magic systems end up being kind of video gamey where you
Mhm.
have like um almost like cooldown times and stuff like you can only you have so much like rolling power, right? Like whatever they call that.
Right.
Um, um, but I feel like in the Nutcracker trilogy, it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah.
There's still rules that govern it, right? Like you can't just keep whipping it out forever and ever.
Right, right.
Um, but it doesn't feel like um there's like video game type mechanics to
Oh, well, yeah, yay, that's that's good to
it.
hear. Yes, that was the aim of it. That, like any other natural process, you have to rest, you have to regain, and then there are moments, and we see with the people using magic, where you've got to dig down deep. One of the things I was probably the most unsure about, and it kind of plays into like the final reveal, the big twist at the end, is this concept that there are moments where Fritz digs deep and he goes beyond what he should be able to. Um and I was always very careful to put something in some character to know that, okay, this shouldn't have happened, this is not normal, this is abnormal, but we're going to talk about that later, you know and then developing Doll was just a really fun character to work with. And if I ever merchandise, I hope I can do like a really great, I would love to reimagine the Nutcracker doll. I see them every Christmas, and they're ugly and unromantic. I was like, "No, you gotta like." I would love to see Doll reshape what we think the Nutcracker looks like. But yeah, even him, there had to be, his evolution as a character had to have some sort of like guideline and limitations as well.
Yeah, that wow, doll grew on me like before I even realized like
Right, right.
um, you know, they got to like the end of the first book, and I was like, you know, instead of being like, instead of being introduced to him with like the full knowledge of what he was going to grow into,
Hmm.
and then to sort of have that moment where I realized that he's going to be more important than
Yes.
it was very impactful.
Yes. Well, and so when I was obviously, when you have the Nutcracker, you've got the Nutcracker. And in the ballet, the Nutcracker Prince is, he does his thing with Clara and the Rat King, and I was like, well, how I think it's fairly obvious. Everyone who's seen the ballet knows, okay, the Nutcracker is going to be doing something. Um, but there has to be something subversive about it because you don't want it completely telegraphed. You want some kind of fun twist at the end. So yeah, Dahl was I had to come up with how in the first book, one, setting up his creation, a purpose for him being created, and then how does he get to a point where he is important enough and powerful enough to carry out his function. And it was really great because then that also turned into an enemy that was a formidable enemy to Fritz in book 2 and book 3. And it also took the power away from it took the magic power away from Fritz. All of a sudden, that was not the upper hand that it had been in book 1. So book 2 and book 3, it was really great having Dahl and sort of Dahl's evolution and how he comes into his own as a foil for the main character. Like it ups the stakes, and the chance of mortality is there.
Um, One thing I want to make sure we talk about, I like to give authors an opportunity to talk about their the their faith journey and the impact that it has on their work. We talked a little bit about it in the written interview, but if
Mhm.
you are willing to talk about it.
Sure. Well, so actually, for all of my bloviating about not liking to preach at audiences, I was when I first started writing this, I was going through my own faith journey, um, and I kind of used book 3 and a lot of things in the whole story to sort of work out. I hadn't really figured it out yet, but there's a scene at the end of book 3 where I honestly didn't know where it would end up when I first started writing it, and it was me quite literally having a conversation like, had I done all the things that Fritz had done, and even in a grander sense, if I got to talk to the character that he was talking to, what would this conversation look like? So I had to write it several times because Fritz ended up sounding like me. It was me responding back, and I had to make sure that I kept true to his tone of voice. My faith journey was interesting. My dad is a Baptist minister, retired now, but I grew up in the church, and I was a very quizzical child, or inquisitive child. I wanted to know why things were, and in sort of this, in sort of the religion that I grew up in, asking questions was not a celebrated. It was not. I can't say that it was necessarily discouraged, but it was not celebrated. And and so I just sort of, I created my own dream world. That's where I lived. I got into college, and the college I went to was small. It was a Christian college, and they were along the same vein as I had grown up in. And I had so many questions about faith and about things that just didn't make sense to me. And there was a moment where I was researching music of the Davidic times. What did that music sound like? Fascinating topic. And I came across another article that just shook my faith to the core. I mean, absolutely shook it. And in the corner of the library, I believe it was my senior, yeah, it was my senior year. I said, God, I'm done. I can't. I'm done believing in you. Everything that I have been taught, we were always taught that the word of God, every jot and tittle of the law. We talked about jots and tittles quite a bit, and I think one of the downside is we didn't know how to delineate what a jot and tittle was. It it was dancing is a sin, drinking is a sin, all of these things that later on, I'd find out indeed are not sins, but that had been connected to jots and tittles. So as soon as I found out, okay, what I'd been taught about this is not right, well, there goes the jot and tittle, there goes the entirety of the Bible. Immaturity on my part, but it was a journey. So I became an atheist, and for several years I was an atheist. I taught in Christian schools because that's what I was trained to do. I said what I needed to say, but I didn't believe it. And that whole time I was studying other religions. I was also studying Christianity. If, I told God, if you're real, you will reveal yourself to me. And one of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. Love the Chronicles of Narnia. Came across his book Mere Christianity, and his approach to proving Christianity was just a breath of fresh air, drink of cold water without using a single Bible verse. He sort of talks through logically. Well, where it landed me was okay, it is mathematically more probable that God is who he says he is than he's not. And I lived in that realm for a lot of years. Part of the journey, but it's just, um, reducing God to a mathematical equation is not wise. It's not where God means us to live. Faith is faith for a reason. But that's where I was, and that's kind of how I existed. I ended up leaving education. I worked for a church, and this church was very big on grace. I'll use that in air quotes, because grace ended up just being a different set of rules than I was used to. Uh, and so, hey, we're going to allow you to do this list, and that's grace. That ended very painfully. It was just it was the first time I think that I had received, well, not the first time that church abuse had happened, but I loved my church and I loved my job working there. It ripped my soul out, and just all the pain that went through. Thankfully, I never questioned God or his love or his existence. I could separate that God does not condone this behavior. And in the same way that I don't always do what God says, they don't always do it, but it still hurt so badly that I was scared of dealing with the church in general. And I just began seeing, and I moved up to Nashville to learn music business. I started my music business, went up there to learn the business side of it. And I would go to churches, and in a little snarky way, I began doing, I started doing Facebook lives. Like after I would get out of church, I would go to a restaurant and I'd be like, all right, let's check out the swag bag. Like, how did this church try to get me this time? And, you're really going to have to up your game. You gave me a mug, but this place gave me a $5 Starbucks gift card. Like, you know, and one of the things that amazed me about my own church hurt situation was the number of people that took me out to eat after this had all happened. And they said, they'd kind of, the pastors of the church would look over their shoulders and they would say, what happened to you was so wrong. That was just so wrong. And I was like, well, can you help me out? Like, can you go, oh, no, no, no. Cause like, the people involved are just like, they're too powerful. I'd lose my job. And it was disillusioning. Um, and so anyway, moved up to Nashville, and every church I would go to, if you couldn't offer them something, as soon as they found out that you were A, flawed, or B, like you would require too much time, you could see how they would say, well, we don't have time for this because we have a church. I'll make a long story short. God worked in my heart, made me realize that when I worked at this giant mega church, that was me. I had met with people that were hurting, and I didn't have time for them because they were taking time away from the church. In essence, the church became my God. While I was in Nashville, I was introduced to Reformed theology. I was a bit skeptical because growing up, doctrines of election were no no. We did not talk about it, certainly not Calvinism. And, we wouldn't dare buy a tulip, let alone subscribe to it. So um, I made the fateful error of getting a book by R.C. Sproul, and that was my slippery slope. It made sense. I began attending my church that I attended. I loved it. The music was great. So I would go for the early service, and then I drove over to a Presbyterian church because I heard that Presbyterians were reformed, and the way that they were talking about God and about grace and the equalizing nature of grace and how unworthy we are of salvation, but yet the gracious gift of faith to receive it, it made sense, but it was blowing my mind, one and the same. And so by the time I moved away from Nashville. I lived in Israel for a month and then came back down to Texas, and I was going to restart my life in Texas. I joined a church, Reformed Presbyterian church, and just absolutely was it was I don't know, all of a sudden I was learning everything new and afresh again, and then started writing this book. And honestly, there were questions I had about what is the ramification of the sovereignty of God? Why does wickedness exist? And if God is all good and all powerful, it's the question that every atheist asks and everybody wants to know. Um, and so yeah, I was really dealing with that as I was writing it, and without preaching. This is not Christian fiction. I didn't write Christian fiction, but in essence, I kind of got to work through a lot of that in Drosselmeyer, the choices he made, and later, you know, the ramifications of choices that everybody in the book made. Not everybody is perfect. Not everybody lives the lifestyle that that a good Christian church would want them to live. But we are all free agents. We get to do that. We get to live that life, but we also get to pay the consequences for our actions, be it good, be it bad. I hope I answered the question. That rambled quite a bit.
No, that's great. Maybe taking a little bit of a different tack, because you talked about sort of in your faith journey, like a very personal impact of like power imbalance.
Mhm.
And then obviously you're a libertarian.
Yes.
So that attitude certainly impacted some of the thematic elements of your stories.
Very much so. And that has more to do with, again, like I said, I don't write libertarian screes. The book is not a libertarian manifesto. Um, I think there is something in the heart of man. We all yearn for freedom. Uh, those of us who find true freedom can tell you we find true freedom in Christ. That's the faith side. However, that bit of us is in everybody. Now fear takes over and you say I want to be taken care of. And the one that swoops in and says, "Hey, we'll take care of you." The state, they always promise, they never deliver, but that is a valid temptation, if you will, to want someone else to take care of it. But deep down in the heart of all of us, there is that yearning to be free. So the power imbalance, even as a child, I was extremely sensitive to child imbalances, to imbalances in power. And when that was upset, when the more powerful got to do wrong things to the less, to the weaker, I knew that that wasn't right. Something wasn't right about it. And that's just been with me my entire life. Especially after my church hurt situation, it was, it was not enough just to see me gone. Like, the people in power had to make it hurt. Like, they had to add that dominance. And so all of that pain, as I worked through that over a course of years, and people who have ever been through church hurt, they will tell you it doesn't go in a year. I know people who are fantastic Christians, and even after a decade, they still hurt. So that part that I wanted to give to whoever would read the book is much like those pastors who sat with me at lunch and said, "Well, we can't go to bat for you because we might lose our job." I think I deal with it most heavily in book 2. Um, you are culpable. If you see something that needs to be fixed, you need to fix it. And it doesn't matter if you think you will win or not. You need to fight. And that is part of our human condition, or not our human condition, but that's part of our humanity. Is if you see someone powerful abusing someone weaker, don't film it. Stick up for them, fight for them. If you see someone in your church or community group that is abusing someone else, don't go, "Oh, I'll put you on the prayer list." No, you've got to stick up for it. It might mean your job. I had a very dear friend reach out who was on staff at the church. Um, it was the last time I ever talked to this person, not by, my own doing, but I had come back to visit in Texas, and I was driving back, and I got a text message, and they said, "Hey, I heard you came and visit. Why didn't you call me?" And I had been working through the abuse situation, and I said, "Well, I didn't think you wanted to talk to me because, I've been gone, not received a single bit of communication from you." And he wrote back and he said, "That's unfair. Like, I really fought for you. I was there for you during this whole, because I had spent the next 18 months after getting fired from this church trying for reconciliation, and it just didn't happen." And he was a fantastic person. I was at his house a lot, meals a lot. He was very friendly. I a comrade in arms, if you will. But the one thing I wrote back to him, and I said, "Thank you for your friendship, but you're a pastor, and I needed a shepherd. I needed someone who would stick up for me." And that's a
Yeah.
part, yeah, and that's a part of Christianity. And even if, people listening are not in a church, just a part of humanity is, you can't come up to a person after they've been beat up and say, "Hey, I am really sorry that happened," especially if it was in your power to do something about it beforehand. And if some young man reads the book, the thing I want them to connect with is, even if you can't win, you still need to fight.
Yeah, I would say that that is a pretty intense theme throughout the trilogy. I talk in my review about, especially in the first book, how intense it feels
Mhm.
for a child, essentially. Because I mean, I forget how old is he in the first one.
16. Yeah.
16, yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
he's, like, in high school, and so
Yeah.
he's, um, on the cusp of adulthood,
Mhm.
um, but, I mean, he's still in school, he still has, uh, the sort of pressure of authority over him,
Mhm.
um, to take on responsibilities associated with his community, um, large I think may and perhaps this says something about gender, I don't know, th largely spurred on by his love for a girl who is like,
Yes.
"Let's do this,"
Yeah. Yeah.
But, he sort of took responsibility for those weaker peop members of his community ahead of time, in sort of a nitty-gritty way,
Mhm.
and then at the end, to take that and just escalate it to, just slaughtering everybody who's there, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
um, it's intense, that scene, but
Yes.
he's like everybody who is there turning a blind eye, like,
Mhm.
not, it doesn't even have to be the bad people, right? Like, who
Right.
are in the
Right.
power. If you're there and you're not doing something against this, you're culpable.
Right. And I approached that with fear and intrepidation, one because of his age, and sort of the time period that this is written in. It is more medieval, a little, Victorian, in which a 16-year-old would be closer to adulthood. However, understanding my modern audience, that honestly is one of the hardest things to write for. In the new book series I'm writing, I'm having to deal with this same balance. Um, but with Drosselmeyer or Fritz, he his character arc, like I said, it's an entire story. And I don't like characters that make the right choices all the time. And when you have the angry, for anyone who's kind of been in an abusive situation, or you go through these layers of grief, the seven layers, the seven levels of grief, and one of them is anger. uh, Anger, and I believe that if you're going through something, you have to feel every level. You have to embrace it and say, okay, I'm in the anger stage. In my particular anger stage, I was just looking for someone to hold the gas can while I lit the match. It was like that. And in Fritz's case, i needed him I needed him to use his power in a way that would feel justified. But in the end, when he finally gets talked to, when he finally has to face up to what he did in book 3, to understand that power is, yes, because you shouldn't. And oh goodness, what is that great line? I think J.R.R. Tolkien said it best. There are many who deserve to die that don't, and there are many that don't deserve to die. I think they're talking about Gollum,
Yep.
and Frodo says, I wish Bilbo had slain him. So in essence, yeah, it needed to be intense. And honestly, I'm extremely, extremely anti child abuse, anti trafficking. I try to be as involved as I can in my own community here against that. For obvious reasons, it's not something I post a lot about, but that is something that's near and dear to me, because in essence, especially when you're dealing with children, you are dealing with the ultimate power imbalance. And you don't just hurt a child and then they get over it. They're developing. And so children must be protected at all costs. And I think, I can't tell you exactly what my frame of mind was at the time that I wrote it, but even looking back and seeing what happened, uh, yes, that side of me came out. I will not suffer. An abuser of children will not suffer them. I tell my students all the time, back when I taught, and even now, I'll say, once you're my student, you're always my student. And if anyone ever comes and hurts you, I don't mind going to jail. Just let me know.
um I sort of building on that in the second book,
Hmm.
you put Fritz in the position of being one of the people who's culpable
Hmm.
because he did nothing. He
Yep.
was so absorbed with his own things that were going. And I mean, he had every right to be emotionally in a dark place, going through grief and
Yep.
frustration, but at the same time, like, you still have responsibilities.
Yes, yes. And that again, that's one of the levels of grief where you're sort of just apathetic to everything. and he had every reason to be apathetic. He's rich, he's got all the gold in the world, he's powerful. He doesn't even have to serve the czar anymore. Like, he's just on his own. He can float around, live the rest of his life in comfort. And a young man of his age, he's 20 by the time book 2 starts. um like, what better life? Think about all the 20-year-olds that, if given the choice, would just put their feet up and play video games all day. He's kind of done his obsessive research, he's falling into despair. um but there's one thing that can pop him out of that, and it's a slow grinding, work up to the point. But he spoiler alert, he finally gets there in book 2, where he decides, okay, yes, he still has to fight. And while there is some motivation from the people that he loves, he begins to come round to, this is the right thing to do. um, which doesn't fully develop until book 3, but he slowly begins to get to the point where, okay, I need to do this because it's right.
I think we probably listeners can kind of see some reasons why this kind of series would need to be indie and why maybe nobody
Yes,
trad
yes.
pub, Christian trad pub might not want to put it out. What were your like decision process for deciding to go the indie route?
So when I was getting to sort of the final stages of the editing on this, I had moved up to Indiana to work at a local theater. I was music director and an actor singer, and it was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. I was playing the same part every single night,
Oh
8
gosh.
times a week, and I was in the middle of Indiana. I lived with the Amish people. This was not a glamorous Broadway theater. But I was singing my Sondheim. And so in between scenes, I would be back in the dressing room, and I was trying to get an agent. I really wanted this to be published traditionally. Uh, in my own business, I write music and I do self publishing with my own company, House of L Music. And that was a financial decision. It's much easier. Like, you can sell 2 copies of a piece of music and make more money than if you sold 200 through traditional publishing. But, I was just writing a book for fun. This was not going to be part of my life. How crazy is that? At the time, the only manuscripts that were being accepted was either LGBTQ, or POC manuscripts, or you had to be LGBTQ or POC in order to be accepted. And, like, this was just all over. I was checking everywhere, and this was the thing, or they just weren't accepting it. As you know, publishing companies took a huge hit um, during COVID times, and they continue to take a huge hit. Um, when I realized that the story of Drosselmeyer was going to be bigger than just one book, it was going to be 3 books, and the people that I was talking to, my editor, Lori Lynn, love her to death. She had a chat with me, and she said, "I'm not just saying this, but this is a great story." Um, she edits a lot of books. She did not have to butter my bread in order to, get this gig. Um, she said, "This is a really good book, and I think it will go places." And then all of a sudden, the rights to it kind of popped up in my head. I was like, I don't know where Drossie's going to end up. I don't know what other mediums we're going to see him on. But the story of Drosselmeyer and fighting for something so precious as the innocence of a child, the safety of family, even traditional roles of masculinity, femininity, falling in love, it was important enough to me that if his story was going to exist, I needed to be in control of it to make sure that this character is portrayed accurately. Now, anybody can take Drosselmeyer and do whatever he want. He's public domain. But Curse of the Rat King, Watcher's Realm, and Dance of the Nutcracker, like, I own those lock, stock, and barrel. So that was the deciding factor, was protecting the legacy of my version of Drosselmeyer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's it's kind of funny that like there are so many reasons why someone might choose indie publishing, but
Mhm.
almost always it comes down to control because the trust in the institutions has been just completely eroded.
I'm a comic book fan. Everything in my life outside of Twitter is Superman. I'm a huge Superman fan. House of L music is even a nod to Kal-El, Jor-El, like, it's the House of L, it's Superman. Um, and seeing, and I love the stories of heroes where it's, because again, heroes typically stick up for the weaker person. There's a power imbalance and someone comes in and they set that power imbalance right on the side of the weaker individual. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, they're taking these great stories, great characters, and just absolutely ruining them. And for those of us, Superman is not just a guy in a costume. I have my reasons why I love Superman, and it has to deal with, as a child, abuse that I went through. And it was right around the time that, the first Superman movie came out in 79. I was born in 80. I saw it when I was 4. And having already received abuse at that age, I remember watching him and that whole character of this guy, blue and red, and he was strong. And I just always knew that he would be someone that would come and save me if I needed. And in, my own child way, there was that, like, I knew he was fake, but the idea that someone would do this, it absolutely was something I held on to. And to this day, I'm almost always wearing something that is Superman related. Uh, and especially when I get into situations where I feel like I'm not at a good power imbalance, like, I'll wear something Superman. It throws back to that. Owning the rights to Drosselmeyer and making sure that this is yet another character that perhaps a boy like me will read and say, "Okay, I can aspire to fight for right, even if I know I'm not going to win." I do not want institutions taking that and, you know, turning him into a transgender, whatever. Yeah, I could not bear to see that. No amount of money in the world would be worth that.
You touched very, very briefly on your next stuff. Genre,
Yeah, so
any
genre, it's going to be, so I'm writing another YAF. There will be some magic. My magic system for this one is very different. Uh, it has to deal s- th- yeah, this is taking place in medieval, like a medieval setting, a different world than our own. And I the opening of it, I'll just tell you the opening because it's there. I think it's fascinating. You start off in this village, and everybody celebrates their 16th, all males celebrate their 16th birthday on the same day. If you're born within a certain time, you have something called the birthday rite. And when you turn 16, you have this big day of celebration. And at the end of the celebration, there's like these fun war games where you're out in the woods and everything. And then you come in, you have created, for the past however long, you've created some kind of gift, and you will say, I claim so and so as my bride. Here's my bridal pledge to the father. And then typically, you would have talked to them beforehand and they accept. And then the very next day, you have a marriage ceremony where everybody in this village gets married on the same day. Um, and everyone, so this village has something called a shepherd, and the shepherd is attached to something called a mater or mother. And the mother is not quite human. She's quite a bit bigger. She has silvery skin, and she is half Pedromai, a god. And so the shepherd and the Pedromai are kind of like the wisdom characters in here. Everyone looks up to them. There is a king. The king is nothing special. He's just sort of another person with a title. Anyway, so in our character, we follow a blacksmith. I have a nephew who's into forging right now, and it gave me the idea. So I'm learning lots about forging knives and swords and what have you. Anyway, so you follow this one character who is going to be presenting a bridal gift. He doesn't know who he's going to marry yet. He loves tradition, just loves his village, wants to live there, take over the forge and do that. But forces come in there that interrupt that, and he is sent on a quest, and he has to explore the wide world around him while yearning for the things that he knows. His comfort level is behind him, but that's what he's ultimately aiming for on his quest. So yeah, I haven't come up with a title for it, but all of it takes place around the birthday rite where everyone's turning 16, he and his best friends, and he's got to decide who to marry. They already know who they're going to marry and all that jazz. Yeah, that's
Oh,
the
that's
next.
awesome.
Yeah, this will be far less violent than my first one, although there will be some really good fighting scenes. He's an archer.
Okay.
In this one. Yep, he's an archer. That's his deal. But the whole overall concept of it is elites. I was turned on to this idea of elitism, that the elites among us live by very different rules, and they do not like to live under our rules is completely bizarre to them. And so that's what gave me the idea. After Drosselmeyer ended, I went over to Ireland and Scotland to study. I was going to research some history over there for my next series, and it was going to be a sixth grade, like a middle age series. Got back, started writing it. It was not what I was supposed to write. Started a detective series. Got a chapter or two into it, and it was not what I was supposed to write. Just couldn't do it. And then this idea came to me, and I was like, yep, this is it. So this is what I'm writing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So just real quick, I wanted to say hi to the chat. Because Patrick has been here with us, of course. And John A. Douglas. And it looks like Karen Williams just came as well. So hi to you guys. Patrick had a question.
Yes.
What characters would Sean and Gus from Psych play in the trilogy? And were there any nods to them in Easter egg form?
I didn't put any nods to them. Sean and Gus, oh man. If anybody, they would be the two guards that argue inside the palace in book 3 when Drosselmeyer is trying to break into the palace and he throws Doll over the wall. They kind of have this little Sean and Gus argument going on. If anyone, that's who they would be. They would pop up for their cameos.
Just want to make sure I don't miss anything here. Oh, you had recommended the Barbie Nutcracker at one point.
Looked at me when I was more excited they had the Barbie Nutcracker movie than my girls based on Paul's right. Yes. The Barbie Nutcracker is fantastic.
So, can you explain a little bit more about what makes it good in your opinion?
They are so true to the story, and the music is great. They don't they keep that beautiful romance. And honestly, the animation style of the Barbie movies, I watch animation videos like CG and that kind of a thing. I don't know, there's just something so beautiful about it, and I like old Disney, I love that they make these gorgeous dresses that little girls go nuts over. I think that is super healthy. I love that there is typically, when I watched Little Mermaid, I wanted to be Prince Eric, especially at the end when he's like steering the ship and all that kind of stuff. I love that there's these great gender roles and everybody just naturally gravitates towards them. Yeah, and so when I was researching the Barbie, when I was researching the Nutcracker, I saw Disney's The Four Realms, I think Nutcracker, The Four Realms, is that what they call it?
Yes, I
Whatever
think
it
so.
was, they just completely butcher the entire story. It's like someone sniffed the Nutcracker and wrote that script. I felt like the Barbie Nutcracker paid homage to the movie, and it was gorgeously animated, and the costumes that they created were wonderful for it. That's great. Yay, the Barbie Nutcracker.
When you had mentioned it, I don't remember if I was in the chat on the video you mentioned it or what, but I was like, oh, I've totally seen that. Like,
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
like I think we had actually my sisters had just shown it to my daughter.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah, yeah. And the way that they animate the ballet dancing in there, whoever was in charge of the animation watched a lot of ballet because everything ballet dancers, one thing I love about ballet dancers is they consider the tips of their fingers. And you can tell when they dance, they're just gorgeous with their line and everything. But then there's the tips of their finger. And I don't know. That's amazing. We don't think about the tips of our fingers in martial arts. We just punch stuff.
my daughter. So growing up, I was very much a tomboy,
Okay.
and I still have an aversion to pink just in general. My daughter is the complete opposite. Like from a very early age, was like, gravitated towards pink, and she one day when I was trying to make dinner, she couldn't have been too much more than one because she was standing in her tower next to me at the countertop, so she had to be at least old enough to do that.
Right.
She's almost 3 now. And I threw on a ballet video. I was like, here, look at this. Like, I already knew that she liked girly things.
Yep.
And I was like, here, culture, while I try to do something just for 5 minutes, right?
Right.
So but like she was just right in,
Mm-hmm.
dialed in, was just the costumes and the movement, and I very quickly realized that the Nutcracker is there for like 2 hours straight.
Yep. Yep.
And I actually never set her in front of that until
Right.
she got sick one day and was like, she was just miserable, and I was like, I'll just put this on for you, and you
Yes.
can just like
Here's the
fall
Nutcracker.
asleep to it. But it was like sort of discovering that as part of her experience, it was very, very exciting.
Mm.
And then the reason that I brought this up, the Barbie Nutcracker, which has all of that actual dancing in it, was right up her alley, right?
Yep.
Because I feel like a lot of like ballet adaptations, either book or movie, like they tend to be more like story and less like this is a ballet, like with dancing
Right.
and
Right.
music.
With dancing. Yeah.
Um, so that it put a new spin on it. You know, it's
Right,
experiencing
right.
things through your child's eyes.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about the actual ballet, the Nutcracker, if you get to go and see it at Christmas, is the first half actually has very little dancing in it. I mean, as far as like ballet dancing, there's a lot of waltzing and galloping, and typically that's when all the little kids come out in their costumes, and you'll have the parents of whoever is dancing, like they're usually the party members. But then second half is just dancing, and the whole point of it, I have to laugh. Tchaikovsky, when he wrote it, you have Clara and the Nutcracker Prince. They sit on stage for the entire second half. They just sit there and they watch, and the whole time they're supposed to be going, "Oh, fantastic! Oh, fantastic!" But the choreography is just beautiful to watch. But oh yeah, there's a story. They're sitting out on stage. They're being danced for. But yeah, little girls especially, there's a something magical about it. Um, yeah, and a lot of times at Nutcracker, the characters will come out into the lobby at halftime or intermission. That's what they call it, intermission. And like to go out there and see the kids light up because it's the costumes and the dress. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Take your kids to see the Nutcracker. Read the book, then take your kids to see the Nutcracker.
Um, I think that I've pretty much asked everything that I was wanting to make sure that we got to talk about. Was there
Okay.
anything that you would like to, um, usually like in my written reviews, I say like, what is something that you want your readers to take away from your stories? So, like, is there anything else that you want to talk about, basically?
The big thing really is, to fight for what's right, even if you can't win, fight for what's right. Yeah, and then shameless plugs. Make sure you look at nutcrackertrilogy.com. And I've been amazed at how many people have requested the book through their library,
Hmm.
which is really great because libraries can order this. You can go in and request the library to order it. The copy at my local library is very well loved. I've got to probably go replace that sometime soon. Yeah. And then, I'm a musician by trade. So this marriage of music and book was kind of perfect for that. But yeah, nutcrackertrilogy.com.
Links are all in the description,
Excellent.
um, including, yes, Patrick, all of my reviews. um, you just reminded me though, because I forgot to ask you in the written review, and I almost forgot to ask you again about the audiobook.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So books 1 and 2 are both available on audio. I still have to reach out to the same actor for book number 3. We've got to get that going. This Christmas, I'm actually going to be showing up to book signings. Like now, once I have all the audiobooks written, if you're an aspiring author, honestly, like this next series, as soon as I get it finished and written, I will not be making it available until I have the audiobooks done. You know, uh, but yes, the third audiobook is very late in coming, but it will be coming soon. So yeah, audiobook is there on Audible.
And you actually wrote a score.
I did. Yeah, I'm a movie like I write music for movies. That's my 9 to 5 piano, all that. That's what I do during the day. I write for movies, theater, live events. And I was like, well, why not write a movie score for this? So yeah, I created a theme for my characters, carried it over into book 2. I didn't do as much for book 2 because I was super busy, but going into book 3, I will probably write a more substantial score like book 1. So yeah, lots of original music in them.
All right. Thank you so much for staying up late with me here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This was fun. I loved it.
And thank you to everybody in the chat. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. You guys have a great night.